This is episode number 12 of Technology and Choice, the podcast where we talk about almost anything, especially if it actually anything that has to do with technology and choice, which really does cover almost anything as it works out. But we take it from the particular angles of looking at it through that lens. I am John Ferguson, your host, and I'm delighted to have back co-host Robert Wurstel here. Robert, say hello to everybody.
Hello to everybody.
Good. I'll, anyway. Before I tell you what, before we get down to the topic at hand, and we got a couple of really neat things to cover. I want to clear up this doctor thing because you go by Dr. Robert Wurstel sometimes. Now, on the podcast I listen to sometimes, Sovereign Tech and also Sex and Science Hour, Brian Sovereign, who has he has the Sovereign Tech, and he occasionally has Stephanie Murphy, Dr. Stephanie Murphy on, and they also do Sex and Science Hour. Now, Stephanie has a PhD, I believe, and some medical school and so forth. She's a real bona fide, as people would accept, doctor. Brian, I guess he got tired of not being a doctor, so he got himself a mail-away Doctor of Divinity. And so he sometimes introduces himself that way. Now, you're somewhere in the middle. You actually did work. You had work, but if we're going to address you that way, I want to know let's be straight up with people. What does that entail? That doctor?
Well, I went to the University of Sedona, which is an actual university out there in Sedona, of all places.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not one of these normal, big Ivy League places.
Right.
But I had to do research. I had to submit a paper. It was peer reviewed, and I got my grades on it. Just like anybody. And of course I had to get a master's before I could do that. And that's on top of my other 6 degrees.
Did that actually 6 degrees of separation? What?
No, I actually went to school for 7 years and got 7 degrees.
Really?
While I studied everything there was about study, I got associate degrees, and I got a bachelor's in computer networking with a specialist in, or what is that called? A major in computer in having a second interfaces.
Wow.
In interfaces. And then I went ahead and got a master's and a doctor's, and
that's even more worthy of being called doctor than I thought. So, doctor, I accept it. I don't know if others do, but that's cool. No, that I respect that. So, a doctor, shall we proceed?
Certainly, as long as I don't have to operate on anybody.
Right. Well, we're always operating on somebody, and being operated on. That's part of what we're going to get into. All right. So, I tell you what, we're going to launch into in this episode is the preeminent technology of the 21st century and beyond. And I'm going to leave that as a mystery here while I cover a few basics, and you'll probably just have to listen to me and nod here for a bit. And for those watching this on video, you can see it. Otherwise, you'll just have to imagine. But I want to give just a touch of background to how we got where we're at here, because I had a really major realization on something that could seem very minor unless you have the background on it. But I like to dig down to the very simplest thing I can find that's a basic truth underlying some field of activity. And when you look at life, that's the one I like to go after. And so, there's this whole thing of the basic thing we have to refer to that everybody can refer to as themselves, just that sense of self. And I really had this, it just took a while, but it started when I really piled in to the SAFE network, and then the Technology and Choice podcast came out of it. But basically, that sense of self implies choice. You have a free will. You have an ability to act. Technology, as we discovered in evolving this podcast, is really just packaged choices. But there was something missing that just hit me. We nicked it in episode number 5, Scam Tech 101, episode 5 of Technology and Choice, technologyandchoice.com. Go check it out. But we didn't really nail it. So I guess the best way to launch from here is aside from just being, what is the first activity? What is the main activity that goes on in life? I don't know. Maybe you could even say in the universe, but I mean, not connected to life. It doesn't matter. We don't care, really. So what's the basic activity? Well, you're always you're either doing something or something's being done to, or you're watching other people's do stuff, right? So if free will exists, if there is choice, it's basically the whole game is influence, even down to just the physical level. If you want to move a pile of rocks, by golly, you're going to have to persuade it to be someplace else. And that's going to be picking it up and applying force to move it, or getting a front loader, or getting an animal. There you can persuade an animal to help you. And that's a little more subtle form of persuasion. Then it gets down to, hey, you can hold guns on people and make them do stuff. That is one form of persuasion. Or you can speak to them nicely and find cooperative interest, and give and take, and organize things differently. So basically, everything that's going on is persuasion. Now, even technology, all of the technology that we employ is used to persuade the universe to do different things than it's already doing. We say, okay, I'm going to push this button and something's going to happen. Good. Maybe you're fooled. That's where we got into scam tech. Maybe somebody tells you that button does one thing, but it does something else. But underneath that is the intention to persuade be persuaded. That's all that's going on, right? I mean, am I missing something, or is that really the first level of dynamic interaction? You can talk now.
I can talk now. I can quit nodding. My neck was getting sore anyway. Well, the whole point, it's like after you learn how to communicate, then it's the next step forward. Well, what do you communicate for? Where are you going with your communication?
Right. I guess the point I'm getting at is everything is persuasion in terms of all technology, but there's also a technology of persuasion that specifically has to do with that activity of influencing human beings. Or, other technologies has to do with how do you influence electrons, how do you persuade other people to do things, and how do you recognize when other people are using those tools on you? That's right. Where we nicked it with scam technology, which anybody who finds this the least bit interesting whether you have or haven't listened to that episode, it'd be worth a re-listen, because there's other aspects of this that we go over in there, but we never really nailed this down and gave it the proper importance, I don't think. So there is that technology of influence, and we, goodness gracious, we saw a lot of that going on this year. I think might as well bring it up. We'll step on that particular landmine of the U.S. politics this year. The presidential election was rife with all sorts of fascinating persuasion tools. And stepping aside and looking at it through the filter of the technology of persuasion in play, it was fascinating. I learned a lot from following Scott Adams. I think I introduced Scott Adams to you, and you got a lot out of it. And those who haven't, he's the creator of Dilbert Comic, and he's also he's a trained hypnotist, and he's very good at persuasion. And he started blogging a long time ago because he saw what was going on and wanted to look. He recognized that Trump was no buffoon. He was no idiot. He is actually applying tools of persuasion. And, of course, the Clinton side probably knew that too, and they were applying their own tools of persuasion to convince everybody that he was a neo-Hitler and a woman hater and racist and all sorts of grabber and all sorts of interesting stuff, misogynist, whatever. And I don't put this forward to, speak up for one side or the other, but this year has been a fabulous example for people if you look back on it through that perspective of what tools of persuasion were being used on you by whom when. Don't you agree?
Right. Yeah, and it was fascinating because there's you can do tons of studies, and I was more fascinated with this thing about, as a chess game, what was happening out there. Because, like, for instance, the Bush had to drop out of the thing early because all he was doing was running TV ads,
Right,
and then,
not very persuasive anymore.
But Hillary spent 1.2 billion compared to Trump not even spending what, 700 million,
something like
or
that,
600 million,
about half, yeah.
And it was like, but the results were different.
Very, very. And also the tools of measuring it just were not on, anybody. There were quite a few people who saw the result coming way in advance, but most people didn't. So that's because, and I'm not going to say what conclusions, people have to find that out for themselves wherever they were at in relationship to that, and notice it in others. But we're talking here about the fact that there is a technology of persuasion, or there's multiple aspects of that technology. Right. And that's what we're focusing on, because technology and choice, boy, what could be more basic than understanding that, hey, I have a preference and I want to create an effect on the world. I guess I should find the tools to persuade it. Oh, it includes people. I really need to know how to influence them so that, I can get a good result. Now, why is it? It's not that there's none of this technology around. So let's look at that. What we covered in episode 5 on scam technology a bit about. There is some of this technology. Robert Cialdini, the book Influence, really good. I since have really gone over that. I got an audio book and I've listened to it a number of times because I'm really down with understanding this persuasion, at least so I can see when it's being applied to me, but also so I can, live smoothly. But even with that book, I found myself hitting the little resistance because the main examples used to demonstrate things were out of the realm of sales, right?
Right.
And we kind of have a resistance to that. We don't want to know that technology. That's a disreputable technology in a way. It's a necessary evil, you hear, but the salespeople, why, they're a pain, but I guess you got to have them, otherwise nothing would happen. People wouldn't buy stuff. But they also take advantage of people because they influence them. Oh my goodness, to buy. So let's run down what technology there is and available that we know of, because it goes all the way back to Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Well, it goes back to the Greeks. Everything goes back to the Greeks, but the ethos, pathos, and rational thought, emotional logic, and where they line that up, and that's Socrates saying, "Here's how everything goes together." Right. And good speech has all three of those, But the point is that coming forward from that, where I got into it was in studying copywriting, because this one guy that I was saying, well, he'd made a success in business, made a lot of money, and he was known as a great copywriter. So if you learn copywriting, he said, then you'll figure it all out. So I got all the old classics on copywriting and started looking them up. And it's before the guy with the speaking. But,
Dale Carnegie.
Carnegie, yeah, I just went blank on that. But these old classics are ones that everybody kept going back to. One guy, he became a well-known copywriter because he just went to the library and read everything on copywriting. Turns out the modern copywriters weren't reading the classics, and these classics were all out of the 1920s, like scientific advertising, and a few others like this. But the fascinating thing, when I read Copywriting Classics, I found out this guy didn't know what he's talking about on copywriting. But everything you read in the papers and on the websites, and all these guys are trying to get you to click on things and look at things, and they all say, well, that if you know the rules of copywriting, of good copywriting, then it will be seamless, and
Right.
they'll think you are everything.
Well, which is of course, it's kind of like we persuade each other all the time with various techniques.
Right.
But we're not always really good. I mean, we're good at it in certain things, but there's that something that there's a resistance to knowing about or finding out about because it's somehow disreputable. And I, if we don't accomplish anything else in this podcast, I really want to go, hey, influence is all that's happening. Persuasion is all that's happening. Some of it you do very comfortably and naturally. If you empathize with people, it's easier to do.
Right.
But if you really know the technology, even without empathy, you can do it even better because you don't really care that you're screwing somebody over.
Right.
But, if, rather than being a mark and going, okay, waiting for that sociopath to start using the technology on steroids to get you to do stuff that's really stupid, if you recognize what's going on, you go, oh, well, I'm being unduly influenced here. Okay. Then I won't be.
Well, it does to some degree go back to this point about whether you think it's a scam or not, is whether you're getting the expected result.
Right. We defined that in the a scam is something where you get different results different than what you were led to believe, which is
so. If you're and what are most of our bad taste about salesmen is because they've done a poor job at it.
Essentially, yeah, because they have, we assume when they approach us that they are operating for a mutual good because we assume that it's voluntary. And if you're being undue influenced, it has the feel of not being voluntary, even though it really ultimately is because, sorry, bub, you're still responsible for your experience. But,
right.
You can, I mean, ultimately, if you want to be hard-nosed about it, that's the truth. But, and I don't think it's bad to be hard-nosed, but it's kind of stupid too if you go overboard. But yeah, anyway.
But that's just bad influence tech.
It's bad influence technology or bad intention using the technology
for good or bad.
For good or bad, and that's really the whole point.
Is
that's all that's going on. Yeah, we've touched on all this. We've touched on all this, but I had it just rocked me back a couple of weeks ago. I went, "Oh my goodness!" And I keep going on about it, and I hope people don't think I'm just nuts. Well, maybe they will, but I tell you what, if you examine it really closely, folks, you'll find yourself feeling just as nuts as I do, and it'll be a good thing. No, because really it's kind of like, it's exciting when you find something that, oh, this is so simple. It's so right there in plain sight. It also gives you an ability to choose a direction about what's going on and to see what's going on better and to go, oh, well, maybe I can improve my skill set by at least understanding the technology of persuasion so that I can navigate better. And there's so much of what goes on in the world that's just a result of people being navigated into walls.
Yeah. But on the other hand, you can also say that persuasion is really part of that social grease that keeps us from grinding each other off too much.
Uh-huh.
The squeaking, keeping the social squeaks from happening.
Well, of course.
Isn't it better to be polite? And it used to be called manners,
It used to be. Well, it used to be given a great deal more importance, this point of manners.
Right.
Because, yes, and that's part of, they're being persuasive is most often in polite circles being polite, being considerate, asking for things. But that doesn't mean that, being a bully and shaming people and so forth are not tools that are used or even at times appropriate to the circumstance or situation. but anyway, and this all then circles around to responsibility and woo, which most people don't want to look at. But I'm sorry, it's part and parcel with going. Oh, I am and I choose. Oh well. Uh,
But but
uh,
perhaps our audience is now seeing how deep this rabbit hole goes.
well, and that's really the
You know?
point. And like I say, don't anybody if you don't want to get really down basic, just turn us off now. Don't ponder what we're saying in after this. When we click off here, just forget it. Okay.
Yeah,
Hopefully
whatever
you'll
you
listen
do,
through.
yeah,
Yeah, whatever you do, don't pay it. Don't ponder the things we're going over because it really is that pondering in which I have the lightning bolts hit.
exactly. And whatever you do, don't think of the pink elephant in the room. You know.
Now we're. Oh, gee, was that an unfair persuasion technique?
Well, maybe it's just exposing what we just did on them. You know,
Well, yeah. I mean, hey,
because you know,
like, and also that we're not actually applying, any particular techniques other than we're communicating, and that's really the most that where empathy can be shared. That's persuasive.
right,
That is uh, an aspect of persuasion. Is there a technology of being empathetic? I don't know that. There's a technologies of acting empathetic. There's probably also technology to perceive false demonstrations of empathy so you can really spot the sociopaths. Those are all aspects of this technology in and around the whole field of persuasion. But my main lightning strike, light bulb going off, whatever, was that recognition that in sentient experience, there is nothing else essentially going on but persuasion and going in all directions.
right,
Behind that is choice. Well, how do I want to persuade? Do I want to be persuaded? What's the mindset that I want to go forward with? Which is similar to saying, how do I want to be? Now that I am, how do I want to be? All of those things. That goes back to choice. But when you get it dynamic, then it gets into persuasion. We've covered that pretty well, don't you think?
yeah,
Good.
yeah,
So I want to, Nick, just touch on a couple of references. Now, I'll put these in the show notes, but I'm going to mention them. I mentioned Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. That was that's not unknown hidden technology. That's been on the Times bestseller list at times for long periods. It's very powerful, very good work. The only is that it doesn't go far enough beyond the experience level of advertising because I guess that was, or of sales because well that's right, he talks about it in the beginning and that's why he researched it because he kept being sold stuff and didn't know how he was being influenced to do it. So he studied all that and was very good, but it applies in all directions. He also recently released another one called Persuasion, which I started, but I realized I had not I had not covered Persuasion yet, and so I went back, and I'm going to be into Persuasion. But that's using techniques to basically prepare the path for persuasion by, I don't know, dropping hints in advance or whatever. That sounds interesting. One that I discovered here and followed, we mentioned Scott Adams of Dilbert fame. He wrote a book called How to Fail at Almost Anything and Still Come Out on Top. Kind of the story of my life. Very long title. That's by Scott Adams. It's a delightful book. You can get it on Audible or wherever. And then the MAGA Mindset by Mike Cernovich. That's MAGA stands for Make America Great Again. He wrote that book about the rise of Trump and predicting what and why. And whether you think it was a good thing or a bad thing or neutral thing, with Trump being elected, even if it makes you crazy, and it completely ruins your world, that he became elected, then you should really read this book because you'll see what and why it was predictable. And it'll arm you to do something about it, even
right.
if, whether, it might change your perspective. be careful. It might change your perspective on what happened, but oh well. You also might then be able to do something about it. And there was I thought of something a moment ago, and there was something in here that we didn't cover.
Well, just while you're thinking of that, there is that Dale Carnegie How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll put that on. I'll
You know,
put that in there too. That I mean, and that's old stuff. And the only problem I've had with that is people picking it up and reading it, and then clumsily trying to apply the techniques, so that people go, "Oh, this person is just doing a technique to persuade me to do something. Why don't they just come out and tell me what they want me to do?" So you say where the technique gets in the way of really being persuasive because you're trying to do a technique. That was I really enjoyed that book, but I had that experience of somebody else who had studied it trying to use those techniques, and it was kind of like, why don't you just, that makes me feel really awkward. It makes me feel like you're insincere, but that's all part of the deal. Well, cool. So I guess that covers the topic of persuasion as a technology. I think it's really important, and I bill it as the most important technology going forward in time. Oh, this is something I didn't cover. The connection, I mean, I didn't maybe highlight it, is understanding that technology is the way forward into a more peaceful, more harmonious society, period. To the degree that we can do that, we can persuade well and honestly, of course. But if you're really armed with understanding it, you can perceive when you're being persuaded dishonestly.
right.
And in that everybody chooses whether you like it or not. You make your choices. You have your influence. You persuade the environment to cooperate with you, to leave you alone, to attack you. That's not to take agency off of anything else, but if you face certain animals, you should growl, and some animals that's the wrong thing to do. Similarly, some of them you run away, that's the right thing to do, and then that's also the way to get yourself taken down and killed by that animal if it's if you're using the wrong form of persuasion. But it basically boils down to that's inextricably linked and is very important. And to the degree that we can apply that, we can make all the other technologies really serve us. To the degree that we can't, we can have a really dystopian future.
Now there is a point I'd bring up.
Uh-huh.
Some of your extracurricular activities point to this same point, or bring up the same point, because you've worked with people on launching their technical product,
Uh-huh.
but they weren't versed in how to communicate it effectively, so they would persuade people to give them the time of day to listen to it.
Right.
And so you would rewrite their stuff and rewrite their pitch and
Oh,
listen
yeah,
to it.
yeah.
And
I have
understand it.
had some experience. That's true. That's true.
And that's
Yeah.
a form of persuasion that any technical-minded person listening to this would go, this has nothing to do with me. Those are all social skills. I'm a
Exactly.
programmer.
I'm a geek. I don't need any social skills. Yeah, I got my video game, and I can communicate with people all over the world on the interface, and I'm fine. But even there, look, you use that. Even there, you use that skill. You just use it differently. You make friends doing, and it all boils down ultimately to being able to have empathy and the desire to be real and to acknowledge the reality of somebody else. Just that understanding brings up one's ability to apply persuasion, because the real connection, the real communication, is the main tool the main thing that's operating. But there are all of those different techniques, and it's worth knowing, and it's a good way to not be a victim. Not to mention a good way to create good effects. Anyway, that covers that, and we've got another segment we're going to do here. We're going to go off in a slightly similar direction. But I'm going to insert here a little bit of an ad. This is a practice. It's an ad that I'm doing because I want to, not because I'm being rewarded for doing it. But it is really related to the area of choice because, actually, I'm listening to a book right now called The Paradox of Choice, which has to do with sometimes you have so many choices that you have no choice. If you have too few choices, you have no choice, and if you have too many choices, you really have no choice because you can't be responsible for it. Anyway, that's an interesting book. I'm not going to recommend it yet, other than it's intriguing so far. But I found this operational in the area of operating systems for computers. I wouldn't have had anything to do with it except Windows Vista made me so crazy. And that I started messing around with Linux operating systems and installing one or the other and having all sorts of trouble. And then since then, it's been an obsession to find the right one for the right purpose. And that's always been a challenge. And I can't say that I've found the one for everything, but I want to recommend Reblin Linux. It's Rebellin. And you can go to the website, thereblin.com. Now, this is a Debian, free and open source, based upon Debian, just like Ubuntu is, but it's not a version of Ubuntu. It's just under Debian. It's maintained by a fellow in India called Utkarsh. I don't know. It's Utkarsh. I can't pretend to pronounce that correctly. But he does a really good job. He's been maintaining it for years. It is beautiful. It's very lightweight on your resources. It's easy to use. It's a little different than some of the others. But here's a beautiful thing. He publishes a manual that you can get. It's pretty easy, and you can operate it. You can do everything free. But if you want to pay one time $14, you can get unlimited email support, and I'll tell you, I've used it a couple times, and he's right on the spot. He answers you very quickly, sometimes within minutes, sometimes a little longer, depending. I mean, he may be in a different time zone. But that was all. I just want you to check it out, and that lifetime support helps him keep doing what he's doing, which is a really good job. Well, all right. Now we get to see about being persuasive about a product. Right? Hopefully my little bit on Reblin was useful. But for those that are watching on video, hold up the product that we were going to talk about. Yeah, not bad. It is move it over. Well, let me see. I got to move my. Yeah, it says a guide to actually getting whatever you really want from life. Make yourself great again. It's got a red cap. How cute. And the title, Dr. Robert C. Wurstel. Now, I don't know. That comes awfully close to something. I'm not sure.
Well, it's a marketing ploy, okay?
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully it's positively persuasive. I find it interesting. So, tell us about your book.
Well, this really has a lot of me in it because it was a lot of the research that I ran into, because we covered this point about being scammed, right? Mm-hmm. And that went so far. But then you bring up this point about being persuaded, right? And the studies found that a lot of people got upset during this election. I mean, just really horribly upset.
Right.
And this is because they have what you called a brittle mindset stack. Means you stacked all you believe is your belief system is built on some dogma, some datum that's supposed to be absolutely true, and it isn't.
Right.
And so, when I was talking to you, it's like I write a lot of self-help books, which you've chided me about. But I said, when I was talking to you about it, I said, this really, or you pointed out, this really goes to the dark side of self-help. How come you've been messed with all your life, from the time before you started learning to talk. And so now you're understanding that, wait a minute, not everything But you've had these failures, and this explains why people have failures, because they accepted something that wasn't true. And all our lives, we've been trained to not look, to not think, and not act. We just go along with the crowd, and you'll be safe.
And hope you learn the right thing and believe the right stuff, because yeah.
But the funny part is, though, they were railing with those protests about the one percenters, But
Right.
it's there's a statistic that keeps going along that 5% of the population are employing the other 95%.
Right.
They're the ones that make the jobs, that start the businesses, and so on and so forth, and they keep everybody else safe and secure and having a paycheck.
Right.
Right. But the problem is that the government, the media, and academia and scientists hate this 5% because they can't be controlled. Because they think differently than everybody else. They look for themselves. They observe. See, there's all these secrets hidden in plain sight, which I've mentioned before, but this book it goes into a little bit more detail. But people don't look at them. They can't see them right in their front yard, and they can't think with what they see, and then they refuse to act unless they know it's perfectly okay and safe, right? Which works for, if you're going to have a regular job, that's fine,
Right.
But if you're going to start a business, that mindset won't work with you,
Right. Right. If you're lucky, if you've got a good herder, if you got a good sheep herder, that's all fine.
Somebody
Yeah.
good that you can follow.
Right.
But the
Exactly. Hey,
Elon Musk,
that can be a skill too.
but you go down all the people that were really going ooga these days about, Elon Musk and the Microsoft founders and the Mac Jobs and Wozniak. These guys. Well, that's great. The Apple company, their early advertising was think different.
Right.
But
Right.
nobody told them, look right in front of you. All the secrets of the universe are right at your fingertips.
They
Matter of
really
fact,
are. If you could just look at them and see them, and it's and we talked about this the other night of even some of the things we're talking about here about persuasion. These things come around in cycles.
right.
Like we forget them societally, or they don't get passed on, or they don't get given the importance, or maybe it's a time in life when you can even start to perceive them. Maybe that's why it's a generational thing, that it doesn't do any good to try and teach younger kids this, because it goes,
Well,
I know that it took me maturing before I really got this, but that
well,
would give the young folks that get this have a real head start.
exactly. Napoleon Hill pointed out that most of the businesses were started by people like Ford. He was 45 before he started Ford Motor Company. And mostly it's after that period of time where all the businesses get started, when
Right.
people are sufficiently failed enough in their life to sort out their mindset so that they could actually then learning from their mistakes. And there's the argument actually that we should treat our life as a startup, because we would fail more often and embrace failure, and so we'd be more resilient. But a lot of people do only get it after they've, and this is, oddly enough, the other thing that happens about 40, 45, 49 is when people, have a change of life. And in India, they would go off and meditate for the rest of their lives,
Right.
beg on the streets as a custom.
Right.
We frown on that in the U.S.
Right.
But so there is that point to that.
Maybe
But what I've found is that these same datums kept getting printed in popular literature every decade. And when I was with you, I tracked this thing down author to author back to the 1880s, which then led to the stuff that was written before history.
Right. Right.
And all these datums, how to succeed in life, are sitting there, completely blatantly obvious. But you have to look at what is keeping you from. How did you get trained to not see, not think, and not act? Which
Right.
in the first chapter, the first section of this book, really go into the criminals here tend to be, or on the surface, they tend to be scientists, the broadcast media, and the government, and academia, which is same thing as government.
They're not everybody in those fields, but that's where the I guess I'm missing something. I didn't get that.
Well, we look up to those as authorities, right?
Right,
Except the authorities are giving us this conventional wisdom, which is mostly false.
right.
There was a great scientific study about scientific studies, and it said that all scientific studies are 50% wrong, just because they're built. You
Right,
know,
right. So the book you have is broken down into four parts. And
four
now,
part.
read those part sections for me. For the folks that I really appreciate the way that's laid out.
Okay, part one is the real world, how you're told things work. Part two is the actual world one, how things really work. Part three is the actual world two, who is keeping things unworkable. And part four is your new world, how to make things work for you.
Cool. Well, that's definitely a level of yeah. Well, a lot of things. It's influence, and it's really real close to that. That kind of fits right in the above list, I guess, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it gets pretty thick in there. That's why right now I've only released the first part because you just want to get these. Part of it is the way Amazon treats their authors, but you get this first part out so you can actually get people going on it right off the bat while I get the rest of it done.
Right. Well, and there is for those listening, there is an opportunity to get all of this free, right? To get the basic book free,
That's
and
right.
the first part is an audiobook, which is really really good. Robert, you do it yourself, so let's give the folks how they can get it. This is not a sales pitch to go spend some money, though you're welcome to always give money to both Robert
Yeah,
and me. But hopefully we're persuading you in that direction,
there we go.
ever so subtly. Never ask for no. Anyway, uh, no, but really anxious for folks to get this, and also to hopefully they will give you any feedback your, on the book as well.
Right. Now the book in ebook and paperback for part one are both available on Amazon. Just there you go. But if they want to get it for free, all
Uh-huh.
they have to do is opt in on livesensical.com. That's livesensical.com, one word. But,
SENSICAL. That's a
right.
made up word, so we have to make sure it's spelled.
Yeah. And slash MIGA join, which is MYGAJOIN.
So that's make yourself great again, join. Okay,
Right.
MIGA join. That's livesensical.com, MIGA join. I'll put that in the show notes as well if you are driving and forget, and you can always look back
There we go.
and check that out. Well, cool. Well, I listened to that the other day, and I reviewed the rest of the book a little bit more, a little more quickly. But I found it really good. Some of it's familiar to me because I've read some of Robert's writings before, but I found this one real compelling and quite interesting. It's only slightly mysterious, but anybody who knows anything about us can be unmystified as to what he's talking about. No, anyway, it's a good book. Well, that's cool, and that's very appropriate to the first part. So there we go. Do you have anything you would like to share with the folks before we end the show?
Oh, I put some other mystery bonuses in there too.
Oh, that's right. That's right. If you join, if you give your email there, you'll get those things and some other materials that you should find interesting. At least some of you will.
Yeah,
Dare you to look and find out if you
there
do.
you look.
All right. Well, gosh, it's a pleasure, and this is a good way to start off 2017 with a podcast of this foundational importance. Just as an aside, um, I'm definitely planning to crank up the podcast volume. It's been slack in the last few months for various reasons, but I've got another co-host who I'm going to be having on for a different area of technology that you'll find really interesting. That should be the next episode within the next week or so. And I may do that with several co-hosts in different areas. Robert, of course, is my self-help, mystical, philosophical, whatever, touch base. But you also keep us anchored in reality. Oh, and we've also got to get into your permaculture and
Oh yeah, one of these
and
days.
so forth, because you actually have good hands-on farming experience in making sustainable, using that sustainable technology. And if anybody really wants to put in the cheer for any area, including that you'd like to hear about, hey, drop us a line at simpleton at safecrossroads.net. It's probably the easiest way to make sure you get me. Or check on the Technology and Choice website, or through Let's Talk Bitcoin Network, or however you happen to get this. Well, all right. Well, thanks a lot. Oh, I think there is still some value in magic words, Robert. Let's do it MYGA. MYGA. Make yourself great again.
There we go.
MYGA. So for those that know what that's about, go do it at letstalkbitcoin.com. Get yourself some LTB coin. And for those that don't, find out. All right, folks. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you soon.